Greg Reynolds entered the courtroom wearing a custom Italian suit, a smug grin, and his mistress on his arm. She flashed a diamond ring costing more than my client's entire life savings. They believed this hearing was a formality to bury his ex-wife, take her kids, and leave her with absolutely nothing. But 5 minutes later, the double doors swung open, and the atmosphere changed forever. What happens when a broke single mom gets backed by a billionaire's private army of sharks? The hunter became the prey. This is the story of how Greg lost everything in one single afternoon. The fluorescent lights of the Superior Court of California, County of Los Angeles, buzzed with a sound that felt like it was drilling directly into Reese Jenkins' skull. It was a cold, sterile sound, the sound of bureaucracy, of indifference, of lives being dismantled on paper. Reese pulled her beige cardigan tighter around herself. It was 3 years old, bought from a clearance rack at Target, and it had a small coffee stain near the cuff that she had scrubbed at frantically in the bathroom sink that morning. It didn't come out. It was just one more imperfection, one more sign of her failure, one more thing for them to laugh at. She sat on the hard wooden bench outside courtroom 304, her hands trembling in her lap. Beside her, her lawyer, Mr. Henderson, was frantically shuffling through a stack of disorganized papers. Mr. Henderson was a court-appointed attorney with coffee breath, a stained tie, and a caseload so heavy it would break a mule's back. He looked tired. He looked beaten. "We're going to do our best, Reese," Henderson muttered, not making eye contact. He dropped a pen, cursed under his breath, and scrambled to pick it up. "But I have to be honest with you." The motion Greg filed. "It's aggressive. He's claiming full custody based on financial instability. He's saying you can't provide a suitable home for Leo." Reese felt the bile rise in her throat. "He made me financially unstable, Mr. Henderson. You know that. He drained the joint accounts before he filed. He hid the assets." I know, Henderson sighed, finally looking at her with pitying eyes. "But proving it is expensive. Forensic accountants cost money we don't have. Greg has. Resources. That was a polite way of saying Greg had stolen their life savings, funneled it into offshore accounts, and used it to hire Simon Vane. Simon Vane wasn't just a lawyer. He was a demolition expert in a three-piece suit. He was known in Los Angeles circles as the Butcher. If you wanted to settle, you hired a mediator. If you wanted to destroy your spouse, salt the earth, and dance on the ashes, you hired Simon Vane. The elevator doors at the end of the hall dinged. The air in the hallway seemed to suck out of the room. Reese didn't have to look up to know who it was. She could smell it first, the heavy, cloying scent of Chanel No. 5, mixed with expensive leather. Greg walked out first. He looked spectacular. It was sickening. He was wearing a charcoal Tom Ford suit that fit him like a second skin. He had lost weight since the separation. His hair was perfectly gelled, and he wore the confident, easy smile of a man who had already read the last page of the book and knew he won. And on his arm was Tiffany. Tiffany LaCroix, 24 years old, an influencer with 500,000 Instagram followers and a soul made of Teflon. She was wearing a white dress for a custody hearing. The audacity of it was breathtaking, and oversized sunglasses that she slowly lowered as she spotted Reese. Tiffany didn't just walk, she prowled. She clutched Greg's arm possessively, her fingers adorned with a diamond that caught the harsh hallway light and fractured it into 1,000 mocking rainbows. That was Reese's money. That ring was Leo's college fund. That ring was the down payment on the house Reese had been forced to sell. Well, Greg said as they approached. His voice wasn't angry, it was jovial. It was the voice of a man greeting an old employee he had just fired. "Reese, you look tired." "Leave me alone, Greg," Reese whispered, staring at her scuffed flats. "Just trying to be civil," Greg said, checking his Rolex, a Submariner, new. "Tiffany and I were just discussing the summer. We're thinking of taking Leo to the Amalfi Coast once this is all wrapped up. It's a shame you won't be able to afford to visit him." Tiffany giggled. It was a light, airy sound, like wind chimes made of ice. "Don't be mean, babe. I'm sure Reese can FaceTime him. If she can afford the data plan." Mr. Henderson stood up, trying to look imposing, but he was 4 inches shorter than Greg and wearing a suit that was 2 sizes too big. "Mr. Reynolds, please refrain from speaking to my client outside of the courtroom." Greg looked at Henderson the way one looks at a cockroach scuttling across a kitchen floor. He didn't even blink. And you are? Oh, right. The public defender. Good luck in there, buddy. Vane is going to eat you alive. I hope you brought a bib. Just then, the heavy oak doors of courtroom 304 opened. The bailiff, a burly man who looked like he'd seen it all and hated every minute of it, stuck his head out. Case number 49204, Reynolds versus Reynolds. You're up. Greg leaned down, his mouth hovering just inches from Reese's ear. She could smell the mint of his breath. It's over, Reese, he hissed, his public mask slipping just enough to reveal the cruelty beneath. I offered you a settlement. $5,000 and you walk away. You wanted to fight? Fine. Today, I take Leo. Tomorrow, I take the car. By next week, you'll be on the street and Tiffany will be raising our son. He straightened up, buttoned his jacket, and winked. Showtime. Reese felt tears prick the corners of her eyes, hot and stinging. She grabbed Mr. Henderson's arm. Tell me we have a chance, she begged. Please, just tell me there's a chance. Henderson looked at the floor. We'll object to the financial exhibits, Reese. That's all I can promise. They walked into the courtroom. It was freezing inside. Judge Margaret Whitaker sat on the bench, looking stern and impatient. She was known as a letter of the law, judge no emotion, just statutes. That was bad for Reese. Reese needed empathy. Reese needed a miracle. On the other side of the aisle, Simon Vane was already setting up. He had 3 paralegals with him. They were arranging stacks of binders, setting up a laptop, and pouring water into crystal glasses. It looked like a military operation. Reese sat at her bare table with Mr. Henderson and his single, messy folder. She looked across the aisle. Greg was leaning back in his chair, whispering something to Tiffany, who was sitting in the gallery right behind him, a breach of protocol. But nobody stopped her. She was smirking at Reese. All rise, the bailiff bellowed. The hearing began, and it was a bloodbath from the opening statement. Your Honor, Simon Vane began, his voice smooth as aged whiskey. We are here today to rectify a tragic situation. My client, Mr. Reynolds, is a successful entrepreneur who wants nothing more than to provide a stable environment for his son. The respondent, Miss Jenkins, unfortunately, has no income, no fixed address, and a history of instability. Objection, Henderson squeaked. Miss Jenkins is staying with her sister. That is a fixed address. Sustained, but move it along, Judge Whitaker muttered, not looking up from her notes. Vane smiled. My apologies. She is sleeping on a couch in a 1-bedroom apartment shared by 3 people. Is that an environment for a 7-year-old boy? Meanwhile, Mr. Reynolds has just closed on a 5-bedroom estate in Hidden Hills. Reese wanted to scream. He bought that house with the money he stole from our joint business, but she couldn't speak. She had to sit there and take it. Vane called his first witness, a forensic accountant paid for by Greg. The man projected charts onto a screen showing Reese's reckless spending. They highlighted charges for groceries, for gas, for Leo's asthma medication, painting it all as mismanagement of funds. Greg sat there, nodding solemnly, playing the role of the concerned father perfectly. An hour passed. Reese felt her life disintegrating. Henderson was drowning. Every objection he raised was swatted away by Vane like a fly. Your Honor, Vane said, checking his watch. We are prepared to move to the final summary. The evidence is clear. Miss Jenkins is destitute. She cannot provide for the child. We ask for immediate, full physical and legal custody to be transferred to Mr. Reynolds, effective today. Judge Whitaker looked at Reese. Her eyes were cold. Mr. Henderson, unless you have substantial evidence to counter the financial disparity presented here, I am inclined to agree with Mr. Vane. The court's primary concern is the stability of the child. Your Honor, Henderson stammered. I need more time to review the... You've had 6 weeks, counselor, the judge snapped. Greg turned to look at Reese. He mouthed the words, Bye-bye, Leo. Tiffany let out a short, sharp laugh from the gallery. Reese put her head in her hands. This was it. The nightmare was real. She was going to lose Leo. She squeezed her eyes shut, waiting for the gavel to bang, waiting for the sound that would end her life. Boom. The sound wasn't a gavel. It was the double doors at the back of the courtroom. They didn't just open. They were thrown open with such force that they banged against the back walls, echoing like a gunshot. Silence descended on the room. Judge Whitaker looked up, furious. What is the meaning of this interruption? Every head turned. Standing in the doorway was a man. He was older, perhaps in his 60s, with silver hair and a face carved from granite. He wore a suit that made Greg's Tom Ford look like a costume from a thrift store. It was bespoke, Savile Row, midnight blue. Behind him stood 4 other people, 3 women and 1 man, all carrying sleek, black leather briefcases, all wearing matching pins on their lapels, a small, golden lion. The silver-haired man walked down the center aisle. He didn't rush. He walked with the terrifying calm of a man who owns the building, the block, and the city the building sits in. Greg frowned, twisting in his seat. "Who is this clown?" he whispered to Vane. Simon Vane wasn't smiling anymore. His face had gone pale. He recognized the man. The stranger stopped right at the bar, ignoring the bailiff who was moving to intercept him. He looked directly at Judge Whitaker. "Your Honor," the man said. His voice was deep, resonant, and carried to the back of the room without a microphone. "My name is Alistair Thorne. I am the senior partner at Thorne, Sterling, and Associates." A gasp went through the room. Thorne, Sterling, and Associates wasn't just a law firm, it was the law firm. They represented heads of state, Fortune 100 companies, and royalty. They didn't do divorce court. They didn't do family law in county courts. "Mr. Thorne," Judge Whitaker said, her voice noticeably more respectful. "You are interrupting a proceeding. Do you have business here?" "I do," Alistair Thorne said. He turned slowly, his icy blue eyes locking onto Rhys Jenkins, who was staring at him in confusion. He walked over to Rhys's table. He looked at Mr. Henderson. "You're relieved, counselor. We'll take it from here." Henderson blinked, stunned. What? "Pack your things," Thorne said gently, but with steel underneath. "You've done enough." Thorne turned to Rhys. For the first time, his face softened. He offered her a slight bow, a gesture of immense respect. "Mrs. Jenkins," he said, "I apologize for our tardiness. The traffic on the 405 was dreadful. My employer sends his regards." Your employer?" Rhys stammered. "Who is your employer?" Thorne smiled. It was a dangerous smile, directed entirely at Greg Reynolds across the aisle. "We represent the Blackwood Trust," Thorne announced to the room, "and we are hereby entering our appearance as counsel for Mrs. Jenkins. Furthermore, we are filing an emergency motion to freeze all assets of Mr. Gregory Reynolds due to massive, systemic corporate fraud and embezzlement." Greg stood up, his face red. "This is a joke. Who are you?" Thorne looked at Greg, then at Tiffany. He looked at them with the detached curiosity of a scientist examining bacteria. "Sit down, little boy," Thorne said. "The grown-ups are talking now." The silence in courtroom 304 was so profound you could hear the hum of the air conditioning unit, a sound that had previously been drowned out by the pounding of Rhys's heart. Now, her heart had stopped pounding. It was frozen in shock. Judge Whitaker adjusted her glasses. She looked from the impeccably dressed Alistair Thorne to the flustered Simon Vane, and finally to Greg, whose face was rapidly turning the color of a ripe tomato. "Mr. Thorne," Judge Whitaker said, her voice steady but laced with curiosity. "You are alleging that the petitioner, Mr. Reynolds, has committed fraud on this court? That is a serious accusation. And you are asking to substitute as counsel for Miss Jenkins mid-hearing?" "I am not asking, Your Honor," Thorne said, signaling to one of his associates. The young woman stepped forward and placed a heavy, leather-bound binder onto the judge's bench with a dull thud. "I am informing. We have a signed limited power of attorney from Miss Jenkins regarding her financial assets, which we believe have been criminally mishandled." Rhys blinked. Power of attorney? Then she remembered. 2 days ago, she had received a strange email from a legal aid group asking her to sign a document allowing them to investigate her husband's finances. She had signed it on her phone, desperate for any help, thinking it was just a formality for Mr. Henderson. She hadn't read the fine print. She hadn't seen the name Thorne. Simon Vane stood up, buttoning his jacket, trying to regain control of the room. "Your Honor, this is highly irregular. This is an ambush. We have had no discovery on these claims. Mr. Reynolds is a respected businessman." "Mr. Reynolds," Thorne interrupted, his voice cutting through the air like a razor, "is a thief. And not a very good one." Thorne walked back to the defense table. He didn't sit. He stood behind Reese, placing a hand on the back of her chair. It felt like a shield. "Mrs. Jenkins," Thorne said softly to her, "do not say a word unless I ask you to. Just watch." He turned back to the court. "Your Honor, Mr. Vane just spent an hour detailing how my client is destitute. He showed you her bank accounts. He showed you her credit score, which stands at a dismal 540. He painted a picture of a woman who failed." Thorne paused, walking slowly toward Greg. "But what Mr. Vane failed to mention is why she is destitute. He failed to mention the existence of the Obsidian Shell Corp, registered in the Cayman Islands 3 weeks before Mr. Reynolds filed for divorce." Greg flinched. It was a small movement, a twitch of the eye, but Reese saw it. She knew that twitch. It was the face he made when he was caught in a lie. "Objection," Vane shouted. "Relevance. It goes to the heart of the custody battle, Your Honor," Thorne countered smoothly. "If Mr. Reynolds has hidden marital assets to manufacture his wife's poverty, then his argument for custody based on financial stability is not only moot, it is perjury." Judge Whitaker leaned forward. "I'm listening, Mr. Thorne." Thorne signaled his team again. The associates moved with synchronized precision. They handed copies of documents to Vane, to the judge, and even placed one on the table in front of Greg. "Exhibit A," Thorne announced. "Bank transfers dated January 14th. $3 million moved from the joint business account of Reynolds Tech into a holding company called Blue Sky Ventures." Exhibit B. Blue Sky Ventures is wholly owned by Obsidian Shell Corp. Exhibit C. The sole signatory for Obsidian is one Mr. Gregory Reynolds. The courtroom gasped. Even the bailiff looked interested. That's business capital," Greg blurted out, standing up. "That's for expansion. Reese doesn't understand corporate structure." "Sit down, sir," Judge Whitaker barked. Thorne smiled. "Expansion? Interesting. Because Exhibit D shows that Obsidian used those funds to purchase not business equipment, but luxury assets." Thorne picked up a piece of paper and read from it as if reading a grocery list. A 2023 Porsche 911 GT3. A lease on a villa in Tuscany for the month of July. And, Thorne paused, looking directly at Tiffany LaCroix in the gallery. A 6-carat diamond ring, purchased from Graff Diamonds in Beverly Hills for $120,000. Tiffany gasped. She instinctively covered the ring on her finger with her other hand, but it was too late. Everyone was looking at it. "That ring," Thorne said, his voice dropping to a dangerous growl, "was purchased with marital funds. Technically, half of that ring belongs to Reese Jenkins. And since Mr. Reynolds claimed in his affidavit that he had limited liquidity, he has effectively lied to this court under oath." Simon Vane was flipping through the documents frantically. Sweat was beginning to bead on his forehead. He was a shark, yes, but he was a shark who hunted minnows. He had just realized he was swimming with a megalodon. "Mr. Vane," Judge Whitaker said, her voice icy, "did you know about these assets?" I was not informed of these specific transactions, Your Honor," Vane stammered, throwing his client under the bus immediately to save his own license. "I relied on the financial disclosures provided by Mr. Reynolds." "Of course you did," Thorne said dismissively. "Now, Your Honor, we have a motion. We move to freeze all assets held by Mr. Reynolds, including the offshore accounts, the property in Hidden Hills, and yes," he pointed a long finger at the gallery, "the jewelry currently worn by Miss LaCroix, as it is considered stolen marital property." "You can't take my ring," Tiffany shrieked, standing up. "It was a gift, bailiff," Judge Whitaker said, banging her gavel. "Silence in the gallery or I will have you removed." The judge turned to Thorne. "Motion granted. All assets frozen, pending a full forensic audit. Mr. Reynolds, if you move a single cent, I will hold you in contempt, and you will await your next hearing from a cell." Greg slumped in his chair. The cocky, smiling man from the hallway was gone. In his place was a terrified boy who had been caught with his hand in the cookie jar. Reese felt a hand on her shoulder. She looked up. It was Thorne. "We're just getting started, Reese," he whispered. "By the time we're done, he won't just be broke. He'll be lucky if he isn't in prison." The hearing was adjourned for a 2-hour recess while the court processed the emergency injunctions. The hallway outside courtroom 304, which had previously been the site of Greg's triumph, was now the scene of his unraveling. Reese stood near the water fountain, clutching a bottle of Evian that one of Thorne's paralegals had handed her. She felt lightheaded. It was happening too fast. Across the hall, Greg and Simon Vane were in a heated argument. They weren't whispering anymore. "You said you hid it," Vane hissed, his face inches from Greg's. "You told me the Cayman accounts were untraceable." "They were supposed to be," Greg shouted back, running a hand through his perfect hair, ruining the style. "I paid that guy in Panama 50 grand to bury the paper trail." "Well, Alistair Thorne just dug it up with a backhoe," Vane spat. "Do you know who that is? That's the general counsel for the Blackwood Trust. They don't take cases, Greg. They destroy targets. Who did you piss off? Did you try to scam Arthur Blackwood?" "I don't even know who Arthur Blackwood is," Greg cried. While the men argued, Tiffany LaCroix was pacing back and forth, furiously typing on her phone. She looked up and saw Reese watching her. Usually, Tiffany would sneer. She would make a comment about Reese's clothes or her hair. But now, Tiffany looked scared. She walked over to Greg and tugged on his sleeve. "Greg," she whined, "my credit card just got declined. I tried to order an Uber to leave, and it said card suspended by issuer." "Greg, what is going on?" Greg swatted her hand away. "Not now, Tiffany. Don't you not now me," she snapped, her influencer facade cracking. "They said something about the house. Is the house okay? We're supposed to have the housewarming party next week. I already posted the invites." Alistair Thorne stepped out of the courtroom, checking his pocket watch. He strolled over to where Reese was standing, completely ignoring the chaos across the hall. "How are you holding up?" he asked Reese. "I don't understand," Reese said, her voice trembling. "Mr. Thorne, I can't pay you. Even if we win, I don't have the money for a firm like yours." Greg took everything. Thorne smiled kindly. "You have already paid, Reese, years ago. We'll discuss that later. Right now, I want you to enjoy the show." He turned his body slightly so they could both face Greg and Tiffany. "You see," Thorne said, his voice low and educational, like a professor explaining physics. "Men like Greg build their lives on leverage. They borrow against the future to pay for the present. The house in Hidden Hills? He didn't buy it." "He said he did," Reese whispered. "He showed me the deed." "He showed you a Photoshop," Thorne corrected. "He entered into a lease-to-own agreement with a balloon payment due next month. A payment he intended to make using the money he stole from your joint business. But since I just froze that money, he can't make the payment," Reese finished. "Precisely," Thorne said. "And the car? Leased. The boat? Leased. He is living on a razor's edge of liquidity. And I just turned off the tap." Across the hall, the reality was setting in for Tiffany. "You're broke?" she screeched. It was loud enough that people down the hall turned to look. "You told me you were worth $10 million. "I am. On paper," Greg pleaded. "Tiffany, baby, it's just a legal hiccup. I'll fix it." "A legal hiccup?" Tiffany laughed, a harsh, cruel sound. She looked down at the ring on her finger, the ring Thorne had just identified as stolen property. She tried to pull it off, perhaps to hide it in her purse, but her fingers were swollen from the heat or the stress. "I'm not going down with you," Tiffany said. "I have a brand to protect. I can't be dating a fraud." "A fraud?" Greg's face twisted in anger. "You didn't mind the fraud when we were flying first class to Paris. You didn't mind the fraud when I bought you that car. The car that's in your name?" Tiffany shot back. "Keep it. I'm calling my mom." She turned and marched toward the elevators, her heels clicking aggressively on the linoleum. "Tiffany, Tiff," Greg called after her. He took a step to follow, but Simon Vane grabbed his arm. "Let her go, you idiot," Vane growled. "You have bigger problems." "Look." Vane pointed toward the courtroom entrance. 2 police officers had just arrived. They weren't bailiffs. They were LAPD, and they were talking to one of Thorne's associates. Greg went pale. He looked across the hall at Reese. For the first time in years, he looked at her not with contempt, but with pleading. He walked over, shaking off his lawyer. "Reese," he said, his voice cracking. "Reese, please. You have to call him off." Reese stiffened. "Call who off?" "Thorne. The trust. Whatever this is," Greg begged, "if they freeze everything, the business collapses. The investors will sue. I'll go to jail, Reese. Think about Leo. Do you want Leo's father in prison?" It was a low blow, using their son as a shield. Reese looked at this man who had vowed to love her, who had cheated on her, who had tried to leave her homeless, who had mocked her poverty just an hour ago. She looked at Thorne. Thorne didn't say anything. He just raised an eyebrow, waiting for her decision. Reese took a deep breath. She remembered the nights she spent crying on her sister's couch. She remembered Leo asking why Daddy didn't come to his soccer games anymore. She remembered the smirk on Greg's face when he said, "Showtime." "You're right, Greg," Reese said softly. Greg let out a breath of relief. "Thank God." "Okay, tell him to." "I don't want Leo's father in prison," Reese continued, her voice hardening. "But you're not Leo's father. You're just the man who donated the DNA. A real father wouldn't try to starve his son's mother just to impress a mistress." Greg's jaw dropped. "I'm not calling anyone off," Reese said, standing taller than she had in years. "You wanted a fight, Greg. You wanted to destroy me. Well, showtime." The second half of the hearing was a massacre. With the assets frozen and Greg's credibility shattered, Simon Vane motioned to withdraw as counsel, citing a breakdown in communication, which was lawyer speak for "my client lied to me and I'm not getting paid." Judge Whitaker denied the motion, forcing Vane to sit there and endure the rest of the proceedings. Thorne didn't let up. He brought in a second witness, a former employee of Reynolds Tech, who testified that Greg had forged Reese's signature on loan documents. By 4 p.m., Judge Whitaker had seen enough. "I am issuing a temporary order," she declared. "Full legal and physical custody of Leo Reynolds is awarded to the mother, Reese Jenkins. Mr. Reynolds is granted supervised visitation, 2 hours a week, pending the outcome of the fraud investigation." She banged the gavel. "And Mr. Reynolds? Surrender your passport to the bailiff before you leave the building. You are considered a flight risk." It was over. Greg sat alone at his table. Vane had packed up and sprinted out the moment the gavel hit. Tiffany was long gone. Greg looked small, defeated, and utterly alone. Reese walked out of the courtroom, her knees shaking. She felt a wave of exhaustion crash over her, followed by a rush of euphoria so strong she almost fainted. She had Leo. She was safe. Alistair Thorne was waiting for her by the elevators. The intimidating legal team had vanished, leaving just the silver-haired man. "We did it," Reese breathed, tears streaming down her face. "Mr. Thorne, thank you. I don't know how to thank you." "You don't need to," Thorne said. He pressed the button for the elevator. "But there is someone who would like to say hello." "The employer?" Reese asked. "The Blackwood Trust?" "Yes." The elevator doors opened. But instead of the lobby, Thorne used a key card to take them to the penthouse level of the courthouse, a private conference area usually reserved for high-profile settlements. They walked down a carpeted hallway to a set of double doors. Thorne opened them. Inside, sitting in a wheelchair by the window, looking out over the Los Angeles skyline, was an old man. He was frail, wrapped in a blanket, with an oxygen tube in his nose, but his eyes were sharp. Reese stopped. She recognized him. "Mr. Arthur?" she gasped. The old man turned his wheelchair slowly. A weak smile formed on his lips. "Hello, Reese. It's been a while. I believe you know me as Artie." Reese rushed forward, kneeling beside the wheelchair. "Artie, I haven't seen you since the diner closed." 3 years ago, Reese had worked as a waitress at a grim, roadside diner to make ends meet, while Greg was building his business and secretly siphoning funds. Artie was a regular. He was a grumpy old man who ordered the same soup every day, tipped poorly, and complained about the draft. But one day, Artie had collapsed. A seizure. While the other customers just stared or filmed it on their phones, Reese had leaped over the counter. She had cushioned his head, cleared his airway, and held his hand until the paramedics arrived. She had visited him in the hospital every day for a week, bringing him smuggled soup because he hated the hospital food. She never knew his last name. She just knew him as Artie, the lonely old man who liked tomato bisque. "I looked for you," Reese said. "When I went back to the diner, they said you'd moved." "I was moved," Arthur Blackwood corrected, his voice raspy. "My family, well, my handlers, they didn't like me wandering off to cheap diners. They put me back in the tower." He coughed, and Thorne immediately stepped forward with a glass of water. "I never forgot you, Reese," Arthur said. "You were the only person in 5 years who touched me without asking for money. You saved my life that day, and you never asked for a dime." He gestured to Thorne. Alistair keeps tabs on people I like. He told me you were in trouble. He told me that husband of yours was trying to crush you. Arthur's eyes hardened, and for a second, he looked like the billionaire tycoon he was. Nobody hurts the people who saved Arthur Blackwood, he said. Nobody. Reese held his frail hand. You did all this? The lawyers? The investigation? Pocket change, Arthur wheezed. But we're not done. Thorne tells me you're living on a couch? I'm managing, Reese said, her pride kicking in. Nonsense, Arthur said. Thorne, give her the keys. Thorne reached into his pocket and pulled out a heavy set of keys with a leather fob. Reese, Thorne said formally, the Blackwood Trust owns a property in Pasadena. It's a modest estate, 4 bedrooms, a garden, good schools nearby. It is currently sitting empty. We need a caretaker. The job pays, let's say, $10,000 a month. And it comes with free housing? Reese stared at the keys. I can't accept that. It's a job offer, Mrs. Jenkins, Thorne said with a wink. Strictly professional. We need someone we trust to keep the dust off the furniture. Arthur squeezed her hand. Take it, Reese. For the boy. For Leo. Reese looked at the keys, then at the old man who she had once served soup to, never knowing he could buy the whole city. She thought of Leo, sleeping on a couch, his legs hanging off the end. She took the keys. Thank you, she whispered. Don't thank me yet, Arthur said, a mischievous glint in his eye. Because the fun part is just beginning. Thorne? Yes, sir? What about Greg's company? Reynolds Tech? The investors are pulling out as we speak, sir, Thorne reported. The stock is plummeting. It will be insolvent by morning. Good, Arthur said. Buy it. Reese's eyes went wide. What? Buy it, Arthur repeated. Pennies on the dollar. Buy the company, strip it of the debt, and rebrand it. He looked at Reese. And I want you to run it, Reese. Me? Reese laughed nervously. I don't know anything about tech. You know about people, Arthur said, and you know about hard work. You ran that diner better than the manager did. Thorne will hire the nerds to do the computer stuff. You'll be the owner, the CEO. Arthur leaned back, looking satisfied. Imagine the look on Greg's face, Arthur chuckled, when he finds out that his ex-wife is his new boss. Reese looked at the skyline. The sun was setting, painting the city in gold and purple. For the first time in a long time, the future didn't look like a dark tunnel. It looked bright. I think, Reese said, a slow smile spreading across her face. I would like that very much. 3 months later, the transition from sleeping on a lumpy couch to living in a sprawling Pasadena estate was jarring. For the first few weeks, Reese Jenkins woke up in panic, expecting to hear her sister's roommates arguing over the bathroom. Instead, she woke up to the sound of birds chirping in the expertly manicured garden and the smell of fresh coffee prepared by Mrs. Gable. The housekeeper Arthur insisted was part of the package. But Reese didn't spend her time lounging by the pool. She worked. Alistair Thorne had been true to his word. The acquisition of Reynolds Tech was ruthless and swift. With Greg's assets frozen and his reputation radioactive, the investors fled like rats from a sinking ship. The stock price crashed to 40 cents a share. That's when the Blackwood Trust swooped in. They bought a controlling interest for the price of a used sedan. On a rainy Tuesday in April, Reese stood in front of the mirror in her new master bedroom. She wasn't wearing the beige cardigan anymore. She was wearing a tailored navy blazer, crisp white trousers, and heels that clicked with authority. You ready, boss? Thorne asked, leaning against the doorframe. He had become her mentor, her legal guard dog, and her friend. I'm terrified, Reese admitted, smoothing her lapel. I was a waitress, Alistair. Now I'm supposed to walk into a boardroom and tell 50 engineers what to do? You're not telling them how to code, Thorne corrected. You're telling them that their paychecks won't bounce anymore. You're telling them that the toxicity is gone. You're giving them a vision. Remember what Artie said. You know people. They drove to the office, the same glass and steel building Greg used to brag about, but the sign out front didn't say Reynolds Tech anymore. The letters had been pried off, leaving ghost outlines on the stone. A new temporary banner read, S.J. Ventures. Reese walked into the lobby. The receptionist, a young woman named Chloe who looked perpetually stressed, froze. She recognized Reese. She had seen Reese crying in this lobby 6 months ago when Greg refused to let her upstairs. Mrs. Reynolds? Chloe stammered. It's Miss Jenkins, Reese smiled warmly, and I believe we have a staff meeting in 10 minutes. Is the conference room prepped? Yes, ma'am. Chloe scrambled to pick up the phone. I'll tell them you're here. The meeting was tense. The employees were exhausted. They had endured months of Greg's screaming fits, missed payrolls, and impossible deadlines. They looked at Reese with skepticism. To them, she was just the ex-wife. Reese stood at the head of the table. She didn't use slides. She didn't use buzzwords. I know what you all think, she began, her voice shaking slightly before finding its strength. You think I'm here because of a divorce settlement. You think I'm a figurehead. Silence. I'm here because this company has good bones, but it had a rotten heart, she continued. Greg Reynolds built this place on debt and ego. I'm going to build it on stability. Effective immediately, all back pay will be issued by Friday. The overtime mandates are canceled, and we are killing the Project Zeus's initiative. A murmur went through the room. Project Zeus was Greg's pet project, a virtual reality headset that didn't work and cost millions. But that was our flagship, the lead engineer, a man named David, said cautiously. It was a money pit, Reese said firmly. We're going back to basics. We're going to focus on the logistics software that actually made money before Greg got bored with it. We're going to be boring. We're going to be profitable. And we're going to be honest. David looked at her, then at his colleagues. Slowly, he nodded. Boring sounds good. I haven't seen my kids on a weekend in 3 months. Go home at 5 today, David, Reese said. That's an order. By the end of the meeting, the atmosphere had shifted. It wasn't a cheer, it was a sigh of relief. They realized Reese wasn't Greg. She actually listened. As Reese walked back to her office, Greg's old office, she felt a strange sensation. It was pride. Not the arrogant pride Greg had, but the quiet satisfaction of competence. She sat in the massive leather chair. It was too big for her, but she didn't care. She spun it around to face the window. Knock, knock, Thorne said, entering with a tablet. Excellent performance, Miss Jenkins. The board is pleased, but we have a small issue. What is it? We have a visitor in the lobby. He doesn't have an appointment, but he insists it's urgent. He says he has proprietary information about the company. Reese frowned. Who is it? Thorne's lips curled into a dry smile. He's listed in the security log as job applicant. He handed her the tablet. The security camera feed showed the lobby. Standing there, wearing a wrinkled suit that was clearly 2 sizes too big now, holding a plastic bag instead of a briefcase, was Greg. Reese stared at the screen. Greg looked haunted. His face was gaunt, his eyes darting around the lobby nervously. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in a week. Do you want me to have security remove him? Thorne asked. Reese watched Greg argue with Chloe at the front desk. He was trying to use his old authority, pointing a finger at her, but his hand was shaking. Chloe wasn't budging. No, Reese said, standing up. Send him up. Are you sure? I'm sure. If I don't face him now, he'll think he still has power over me. I need to show him that the ghost he's chasing is gone. 5 minutes later, the door opened. Greg walked in. He stopped dead in his tracks. He had expected to see a liquidator. He had expected to see a stranger. He hadn't expected to see Reese sitting behind his mahogany desk, framing a photo of Leo and Arthur Blackwood on the shelf where his Entrepreneur of the Year trophy used to be. Reese, Greg breathed. Have a seat, Greg, she said, gesturing to the uncomfortable guest chairs, the ones he used to make his subordinates sit in while he lectured them. Greg didn't sit. He walked forward, his eyes wide. What are you doing here? Where is the CEO? You're looking at her, Reese said calmly. Greg let out a ragged laugh. You? You can't run a tech company. You can barely run a toaster. Who put you up to this? Was it that lawyer? Is this some kind of joke? The Blackwood Trust acquired the company, Greg. They appointed me to clean up your mess. Greg gripped the edge of the desk. My mess? I built this. This is my legacy. Your legacy is a fraud investigation and $3 million in debt, Reese replied, opening a file folder. Speaking of which, how is the investigation going? Greg flinched. He slumped into the chair. They took the passport. They took the house. Tiffany left me the day the cards stopped working. She sold the story to TMZ. My nightmare with the broke billionaire. It's trending. He looked up at her, his eyes wet. Reese, I have nothing. I'm sleeping in a motel in Reseda. The roaches are the size of cats. I know the feeling, Reese said, her voice devoid of sympathy. I slept on a couch for 6 months while you flew to Paris. I made mistakes, Greg stammered. I got caught up in the lifestyle, but I can fix it. Reese, listen to me. I know this company. I know the code. You need me. He leaned forward, trying to summon his old charm. Hire me back. As a consultant, I won't even ask for a big salary. Just enough to get an apartment. To get back on my feet. We were a team once, right? Remember? You and me against the world? Reese looked at him. She really looked at him. She searched for the man she had fallen in love with 10 years ago, but he wasn't there. There was only a narcissist who was sorry he got caught. We were never a team, Greg, she said softly. I was your prop, and when I stopped being useful, you threw me away. That's not true. It is true. You tried to take my son. You tried to starve me out. You stood in that hallway and laughed at my clothes. Reese closed the folder. I checked with HR, Greg. We do have an opening. Greg's face lit up. Hope, pathetic and desperate, washed over him. Really? CTO? VP of Strategy? Janitorial, Reese said. Greg froze. What? The night cleaning crew is short-staffed. It pays minimum wage, plus benefits after 90 days. It's honest work, Greg. Better than what you've been doing for the last 5 years. Greg stood up, his face turning purple. You want me? To scrub toilets? In my building? It's not your building, Reese reminded him. And it's the only offer on the table. Take it or leave it. Greg stared at her, trembling with rage. For a second, Reese thought he might lunge at her. But then, the fight went out of him. He looked around the office he had designed to intimidate people, and realized it was doing exactly that. I can't, he whispered. I can't do that. Then you should leave, Reese said, turning back to her computer. I have work to do. Greg stood there for a long moment, waiting for her to crack, waiting for her to offer him a lifeline. But Reese kept typing. He turned and walked to the door. His footsteps were heavy, shuffling. Reese, he said at the door. She didn't look up. Goodbye, Greg. He walked out. Reese waited until the door clicked shut. Then, she let out a long, shaky breath. She didn't cry. She didn't feel sad. She felt light. The heavy weight she had been carrying for years, the fear of him, the need for his approval, was gone. Thorne poked his head in a moment later. Security escorted him out. He was seen getting on a bus. Good, Reese said. She picked up the phone. Thorne, get me David from engineering. I have an idea about that logistics software. 6 months later, the gala for the relaunch of Phoenix Innovations was the event of the season. The ballroom of the Beverly Wilshire Hotel was packed with investors, press, and the elite of Los Angeles. Reese stood on the balcony, overlooking the party. She wore a gown of emerald green silk that matched her eyes. She held a glass of champagne, but she wasn't drinking it. She was just watching. Down below, the company was being celebrated. They had turned a profit in the second quarter. The legal battles were over. Greg had pleaded guilty to 2 counts of wire fraud to avoid a lengthy trial. He was currently serving 3 years in a minimum security facility in Nevada. You look like a queen surveying her kingdom, a raspy voice said. Reese turned. Arthur Blackwood was sitting in his wheelchair, looking healthier than he had in years. He had an oxygen tube, but his color was good. Thorne stood beside him, looking dapper in a tuxedo. I'm just a caretaker, Artie, Reese smiled, bending down to kiss the old man's cheek. It's your kingdom. Not anymore, Arthur grunted. He reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope. Thorne, tell her. Thorne cleared his throat. Mr. Blackwood has transferred the majority shares of Phoenix Innovations into a trust. The beneficiary of that trust is Leo Jenkins. Reese gasped. Artie, that's too much. It's not for you, Arthur winked. It's for the boy. I don't have grandkids. And he's a good kid. He beat me at chess last week. Smart. He cheated. Reese laughed. He moved the rook when you weren't looking. I know, Arthur chuckled. That's why I like him. He has initiative. Arthur looked out at the party. You saved me, Reese. Not just in the diner. You gave an old man something to care about in his final years. Watching you take down that bully. Best entertainment I've had in decades. Tears welled in Rhys's eyes. I couldn't have done it without you. Maybe, Arthur said, but you're the one who walked into the fire. I just gave you the suit. The music swelled inside. It was a slow song. Go, Arthur commanded. Go, dance. Not with me. With that nice architect you told me about. The one who doesn't have a secret offshore account. Rhys blushed. Mark is just a friend. Thorne has run a background check. Arthur deadpanned. He's clean. Go. Rhys laughed. She squeezed Arthur's hand, nodded to Thorne, and walked back into the ballroom. As she moved through the crowd, people turned to look at her. Not with pity, not with judgment, but with respect. She saw her reflection in a tall mirror. She saw the scars of the past, yes, but she also saw the future. She saw a mother who had fought for her son and won. She saw a woman who had walked through hell and came out holding a torch. She spotted Leo near the dessert table, sneaking an extra macaron. He looked happy. He looked safe. Rhys took a sip of her champagne. The bitterness of the past was gone. All that was left was the sweet taste of victory. She walked onto the dance floor, ready for whatever song played next. They thought she was weak because she was kind. They thought she was broken because she was poor. But Greg Reynolds and Tiffany LaCroix learned the hard way. You never kick a woman when she's down, because you never know who is standing in her corner. Rhys didn't just win a court case. She reclaimed her dignity, built an empire, and proved that the best revenge isn't hatred, it's massive, undeniable success. Greg is sitting in a cell, Tiffany is chasing her next target, and Rhys, she's running the world. If you loved seeing justice served ice cold, hit that like button. It helps us share these stories with more people. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. Have you ever seen a karma hits back moment in real life? Tell us about it in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next one.